These are war crimes that are being committed by the dictatorial regime in the Kremlin.
This sentence shows that they're so afraid of him and they hate him so much for his consistency, for his courage.
Prominent figure in the Russian opposition movement, Vladimir Kara-Murza, is a British-Russian political activist and journalist who has long challenged Vladimir Putin's authoritarian rule. He has dedicated his career to advocating for democratic reforms in Russia, often at great personal risk. His tireless efforts to expose government corruption and human rights abuses made him a target of the Kremlin. In 2015, and again in 2017, Kara-Murza was poisoned in what he claims were assassination attempts by Russian security forces. Both times, he barely survived, suffering nerve damage that continues to affect his health. However, in April 2022, following his outspoken opposition to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Kara-Murza was arrested in Moscow. He was charged with spreading false information about the Russian military, a vague accusation frequently used to silence critics of the government. His arrest marked a new phase in Putin's aggressive crackdown on dissent, as thousands of Russians were detained for protesting the war. In 2023, the activist was sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security prison in Siberia, a brutal punishment that shocked international observers and human rights organizations. Despite it all, he never backed down and kept fighting, even from behind bars.
Очень много уныния, очень много отчаяния, которое понятно по-человечески. Я сам в тумане всю эту неделю нахожусь. Я до сих пор ни разу эмоций не воспринимаю то, что случилось. Но если мы будем поддаваться унынию, впадать в отчаяние, это ровно то, что им нужно. Мы не имеем права этого делать. И мы нашим погибшим товарищам в первую очередь обязаны тем, что продолжать работать с еще большей силой. И добиться того, ради чего не жили и ради чего не погибли. Чтобы Россия стала нормальной, свободной, европейской, демократической страной. Я абсолютно не сомневаюсь, что так и будет. Будущее остановить не сможет никто, как бы они ни хотели. Поэтому, друзья, никакого отчаяния, никакого уныния мы себе позволить не можем.
However, in a dramatic turn of events, he was released in August 2024 as part of a major prisoner swap between Russia and the West. Alongside 15 other detainees, including journalists and political activists, Kara-Murza was freed in what has been described as the largest such exchange since the Cold War.
Their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free.
Upon his release, the activist quickly resumed his role as a leading voice against Putin's regime. In his first major interview, he made a bold and striking prediction. Vladimir Putin's downfall is inevitable.
It is absolutely clear to my mind that once this regime is out of power, and it is only a question of when and not if, again, this is me speaking as a historian, not as a politician, it is only a question of when, not if. When this regime is out of power, there will have to be enormous work.
This leads us to Vladimir Kara-Murza's unique perspective on Putin's rule, having spent years at the center of the Russian opposition. In his view, Vladimir Putin's fall is not a question of if, but when. There are several key reasons behind his conviction, starting with the growing disillusionment within Russia itself. Public dissatisfaction with the war in Ukraine has been steadily increasing, especially as the conflict drags on with no clear end in sight. Economic hardships brought on by Western sanctions and military spending have begun to strain Russian society. According to the ex-dissident, these pressures will only build over time, leading to cracks in the once solid foundation of Putin's regime. He also emphasizes that Putin's increasing reliance on repression is a sign of weakness, not strength. While Putin has maintained control through fear and force, the regime's reliance on heavy-handed tactics like arrests, censorship, and violence indicates that it is becoming more fragile. For Kara-Murza, this reliance on authoritarian measures only accelerates the process of collapse, as it isolates the government from the very people it claims to protect. Just as past dictatorships have crumbled when they could no longer rely on fear alone, Putin's regime is heading down the same path. He stated that while no one can predict the exact moment or conditions under which this change will happen, history shows that authoritarian regimes often fall when least expected.
If we go by Russian history, major political changes in our country usually happen like this, unexpectedly and suddenly. And the next time will be absolutely the same. I mean, just think of the fact that both the Roman Empire at the beginning of the 20th century and the Soviet regime at the end of the 20th century collapsed in 3 days. This is not a figure of speech. I'm talking literally here. And this is how it's going to happen next time. And so we all need to be preparing for our part how we deal with this inside of Russia. But also, I think it is very important to it's very important for the free world, for the leaders of Western democracies, to prepare on their side as well. Because once things really do change in Russia, and once we do start this work on transitional justice, on this transition from dictatorship to democracy inside of Russia, it is very important that the free world stands ready to help reintegrate that new democratic post-Putin Russia back into the civilized world, back into the rule-based international order.
The activist also thinks that a successful transition to democracy in Russia must also include justice for the crimes committed under Putin's rule. He believes that Putin and his regime should be held accountable for their actions, particularly the repression of political dissidents and the atrocities committed in Ukraine. At a press conference following his release, Kara-Murza expressed his hope that Putin lives long enough to face trial for his crimes. He argues that this pursuit of justice is a fundamental part of creating a new Russia, one where the rule of law prevails and the government is held accountable to its people. Vladimir Kara-Murza's relentless fight for a democratic Russia showcases his unwavering strength and deep love for his country. Despite imprisonment and assassination attempts, he remains committed to a future of freedom and justice. His courage under extreme risk highlights the resilience of those who refuse to be silenced, fighting for a brighter, better Russia.
Of this verdict, freedom-minded people in this country and all over the world recognize Vladimir Kara-Murza as a man of honor and conscience.